Chapter 522, Forcing Their Request. 2. Sure. The three of them turned around and walked out. However, when she was about to leave, Auntie Ning turned her head and glanced at the three of them before walking out. After they left, Madame Cui said, "Wanning, you know our situation. Can you borrow some money from the Gu family to help us overcome our difficulties?" After young Wanning heard this, she replied with a troubled expression, "If grandmother is the one asking, one have no reason to refuse. But my cousin's foundation is too shallow, and they can only lend us another 8 or 10 taels of silver. It's just a drop in the ocean in our situation." She paused for a moment and continued, "Oh right, I heard that they have been looking to buy food supplies. Why don't we use the excess food we have to trade with them?" Madame Cuy's mouth twitched. "It's not like you don't know how precious food is now. If we sell them our food, what will we eat? But they really, since it's that difficult, forget it. Oh, why don't you go through the Gu couple and ask them to remind King Rue to send his betrothal gifts in advance?" Young Wanning wanted to say something, hesitated, and finally replied, "Mother did request me to do the same previously. However, His Highness had just gotten married today. In my opinion, he wouldn't send out my betrothal gifts within a month, or perhaps before the new year." Mrs. Cui was afraid that Madame Cui would back off after hearing that, so she interrupted, "What's the big deal? It's just giving your betrothal gifts. It's not marrying you, so I'm sure it's fine." But young Wanning looked like she wanted to say something more but hesitated. When the old madam heard her say this, she knew that it was impossible for King Rue to send over young Wanning's betrothal gifts before Wanya's wedding. She waved her hand. "Just pass on the message. Whether it succeeds or not depends on His Highness." She got up after saying that. "All right, go now. Go quickly so that you reach there before twilight." After saying that, the old madam walked out. On the other end, when Zhouing arrived at the royal residence, she was surprised to find that the Empress Dowager and King Xian's consort were the ones entertaining the womenfolk. Of course, with them around, everyone else was much more careful when they spoke. Therefore, Zhouing stepped forward, bowed, and planned to find a corner to sit in. However, the Empress Dowager waved at her before she could find a seat. "Miss Zhou, come over here to my side." "Yes, Empress Dowager." Zhouing had no choice but to step forward with a smile. "Oh, so you do know that I'm the Empress Dowager? A few days ago, at your housewarming party, why didn't you invite me?" The Empress Dowager glared at her and asked her to sit beside her. "Yeah, I heard their newly installed floor heater is especially warm. Oh, the hot pot is said to be so spicy and delicious that those who ate it could not stop." Consort Xian echoed. "It's my fault. This commoner will send a portion to each of you after this." Zhouing immediately stood up and apologized. "HM? Commoner? Didn't the Emperor give you an imperial mandate?" The Empress Dowager asked in surprise. "I was raised among the servants since I was young, and I don't think I'm qualified to accept an imperial mandate." Zhouing shook her head at that. Moreover, Gu Shengru's position in the government was still unstable, so it was expected that the Emperor would not give her an imperial mandate. Besides, she didn't want it. If she were given an imperial mandate, it would limit her freedom. Thus, in order to prevent the Empress Dowager from interfering, she continued, "The Emperor is wise, and he must have his reasons for doing so. We will just listen to the Emperor's arrangements." When the Empress Dowager heard her say this, she said nothing more. Instead, she said, "The day after tomorrow, come to the palace. I would love to try your cooking." After saying that, she looked at Granny Lu. Granny Lu nodded and gave Zhouing a token to enter the palace. After Zhouing took it, she could only bow and reply, "Sure, one will remember it." After saying that, she retreated to the side. Chapter 523, Forced to Stop After a while. Mingyu followed Consort in. With her company, Zhouing finally had someone to chat with. Soon, someone from the Zhou family arrived, and it was only Madame Zhou. The two looked at each other, nodded politely, and then went about their things. Although everyone was curious about their attitudes toward each other, no one said anything when they remembered what had happened at the palace banquet. Next, the Yang family's group of 4 walked in. Everyone looked at them in surprise. Food was scarce these days, and every family would try their best to attend all kinds of banquets with as few people as possible. No one here expected that 4 of them would be attending this banquet. After they bowed to the Empress Dowager and sat down, someone asked curiously, "Madam Yang, I heard your residence was robbed. Did you find any clues regarding the culprit?" "Not yet, but the government is helping us to investigate," Madame Chui replied with a dry smile. "This is strange. You mentioned that so many things were stolen, yet none of you heard anything?" "Not really. Have you heard of the 5 ghosts manipulation technique? I heard that ghosts won't make a sound when moving things around. If they can't hear anything, someone should have at least seen something. The same is for Mother Goddess. Although she could put things down silently, there would always be something that could be seen or touched. Say, with so many patrolling your residence and so many servants on duty, how could no one notice anything when that many things are stolen? Yeah, everything about this is just strange. No matter how you think about it, it's just creepy." Madame Chui was disgusted after hearing this. What did they mean by saying their residence was strange? How could their residence be creepy? If this continued, everyone would probably think their residence was haunted. She quickly changed the topic and said, "Oh, right. When did the wedding envoy leave? Would they be back soon?" What she didn't know was that many people in the capital firmly believed that the Yang family's residence was haunted. Moreover, they must have done something wrong and were suffering retribution. Of course, some others felt that Yang Shicheng was just acting. Otherwise, how else would they explain that everything in their residence had been emptied overnight? This group of people included the emperor. The emperor had begun to suspect that he had taken many bribes and started investigating. "No, they won't be back that fast. Our 2 places are located at opposite ends of the city. At the very least, the envoy must traverse half the city." Consort Xian replied. The capital streets were particularly lively because the wedding envoy was forced to stop halfway. They were stopped because there were 5 strong men pulling on an old man and a young girl. The best man, Zhou Huaiming, quickly dismounted and walked over. "What's going on?" When the young girl saw Zhou Huaiming, she immediately turned around and kowtowed. "Sir, please save me. One don't want to get sold into a brothel." When she kowtowed and begged for mercy, the 5 men chasing her saw King Rue and the others on their horses. They looked at each other and turned to run. "Capture and detain them." Zhou Huaiming saw this and immediately ordered the officer who had rushed over. When the officer heard this, he chased after them. The 2 sides quickly fought, but only 2 of the 5 men were caught, and the rest ran away. Zhou Huaiming said to the young girl, "You 2 follow them to the government office. They'll go over in the afternoon." Before the young girl could return to her senses, the old man had already pulled her to the side. Zhou Huaiming saw that the path had been cleared, so he immediately got on his horse and continued their trip. Chapter 524 Envy. Just as it was getting late, the emperor and empress and the 4th prince's mother, Consort Shu, rushed over. Everyone immediately went forward and bowed to them. Next was the wedding ceremony. Zhouing took the opportunity to take a good look at Sun Myok's wedding dress. It was a bright red dress with patterns of birds and beasts embroidered with gold thread. The back of the dress stretched out 6 feet long. Overall, it looked both stylish and beautiful, making her envious. Looking at the empress' luxurious attire, she finally understood why women fought so hard to attain a higher status. At least, they could dress better than others. First bow, to heaven and earth. Second bow, to your ancestor. Third bow, to each other. Head into your bridal chamber. The emperor looked at the backs of the newlyweds and laughed. "Ha ha ha, one have succeeded in completing another major milestone in my life. Congratulations to the emperor. Long live my emperor." Everyone immediately stood up and bowed to him. "Everyone, please rise. Today, I'm attending the wedding as a father. Let's all have a good drink." After saying that, the emperor looked at Butler Feng and said, "Let's begin the banquet." "Thank you, your majesty." Everyone stood up and bowed before taking their seats at the banquet. Zhou Ying and the other women returned to the backyard. After they sat down, Mingyu looked at Wanning and asked, "Wanning, what's wrong?" Yang Wanning was surprised by the question. "Nothing. I just thought of something." I see. Mingyu didn't ask anymore. Yang Wanyu sneered at her, saying, I'm sure she's just envious of Sun Myok's red wedding dress, as if you can wear it too. Yang Wanning replied unhappily. You? Yang Wanyu was about to retort when Yang Wanning shook her head. She added hesitantly, I'm just worried about our dowries. Look at her 88 sets of dowries. One don't even know what you can gather when you get married at the end of the month. Yang Wanyu was so angry after hearing that she picked up the chopsticks in her hand and was about to hit Yang Wanning. Mingyu raised her head and pinched Yang Wanyu's chopsticks with her fingers. Don't forget where we are. Yang Wanyu angrily glared at Mingyu, glared at Yang Wanning, and finally let go of her hand and changed tables. Mingyu smiled and shook her head when she saw this. She winked at Yang Wanning and said, Well done. You finally know how to counterattack. Yang Wanning smiled silently at that. However, she couldn't feel happy even doing so. Because Wanyu was right, she was envious of the red wedding dress when she had to wear a pink one as the secondary consort. She also knew that she shouldn't have these feelings, but no matter what, she was envious. Zhouing saw Yang Wanning's mind wandering off, and coupled with her reaction moments ago, she more or less guessed her thoughts. However, Tang Wanning had chosen her own path, and there was no way to retreat. She knew that she had to bite the bullet and rush forward from here on. Mingyu had the opposite thought. She felt that Yang Wanning was worried about her dowry. After all, the Yang family went broke, and she doubted if they could even take out a decent, sizable dowry. Wanning, are you worried about your dowry? Yang Wanning shook her head and replied, I'm more worried about Wanya's dowry. Her wedding date is coming soon, but there's nothing in the residence that we can take out. When one came out today, my mother even asked me to borrow money from my cousin-in-law. What are you saying? Even if they want to borrow money, they should borrow it from Wanya's mother's family. Why would they ask you to borrow money from Sister Zhou? Moreover, the dowry of a secondary consort is at least 80,000 taels of silver. Even if Sister Zhou and the others could take it out, they would have to empty their family's coffers. Why would they? I don't agree either. But now, she's having ideas about my betrothal gifts. She wants me to send a letter to King Rue through Brother Zhou to ask His Highness to send my betrothal gifts as soon as possible. Chapter 525 Egg Fried Rice 1. What? Are they shameless? Mingyu exploded when she heard that. Zhouing immediately tugged at her sleeve. Everyone who was eating immediately raised their heads and looked at Mingyu with gossipy faces. Seeing this, Mingyu smiled awkwardly and waved her hand. Cough, cough. Continue to eat and drink. We're just chatting. Seeing this, everyone did not ask any more questions and continued the banquet. Zhouing lowered her head and asked softly, Wanning, what do you think? It would be best if the entire capital knew about it, but it can't be the three of us who spread it. Yang Wanning looked at Mingyu after she finished speaking. Mingyu's eyes widened when she heard that. She nodded in understanding and replied, One understand. Soon after, Zhou Huaiming accompanied King Rue and started toasting drinks. When it was their turn, Zhou Huaiming said to Zhouing, Sister-in-law, please come out when you're almost done eating. Zhouing nodded. After they left, she ate another piece of chicken, got up, and walked out. As soon as she reached the outside, she was stopped by a young eunuch. Xiaodetzi greets Madame Gu. Please follow me. After saying that, he turned around and walked to the side. Zhouing hesitated for a moment and followed him. At the same time, she opened her spiritual senses to monitor her surroundings just in case. When they arrived at an empty space, Xiaodetzi said, Madame Gu, please take the time to make a pot of egg fried rice. The Empress Dowager, the Emperor, and the Empress would like to taste your cooking. Zhouing was surprised to hear that. Since King Rue knew that they were coming, he would definitely prepare enough food for them. Why did they still want to eat egg fried rice? Xiaodetzi had met countless people since he was young, and he could guess what she was thinking at a glance. However, he could not say that the three were just craving to taste her cooking, so he could only cough and ask, What do you need? Zhouing hesitated momentarily before replying, Let's go to the kitchen and look. Different ingredients will taste different. Please follow me. After Xiaodetzi finished speaking, he brought her to a big kitchen. When they arrived at the kitchen, most of the cooking had stopped, with only a few helpers still busy cleaning. Zhouing glanced at the remaining ingredients in the kitchen. To be honest, there was barely anything. Fortunately, there was still pork fat, onions, carrots, eggs, and cold rice. She turned around and asked, "Do all 3 guests eat carrots?" "Yes, but you have to control the amount." "No problem. It's just for color." Zhouing glanced at everyone in the kitchen and said, "However, just leave the helpers behind. The rest of them have to leave." Xiaodetzi nodded after hearing this and understood her concerns. He left behind a young boy stoking a fire and chased everyone out. Zhouing quickly started preparing. First, she took a big, clean basin and scattered the cold rice before placing it in front of a stove. The hot wind would evaporate the water in the rice faster. Then, she cracked 6 eggs and added salt and a small amount of pepper to them. She cut up some green onions and small radishes for later use. Then, she prepared the pork fat that she needed. After preparing everything, she didn't hurry to stir-fry the rice. Instead, she waited for the rice to cool down completely. At the same time, Zhouing prepared a simple thermal container. It was made simple by putting hot water in the bottom container and the egg-fried rice on top. After ensuring the cold rice was no longer sticky, she asked the helper to make the fire bigger. First, she poured a large spoonful of pork fat, followed by the eggs. Before the eggs could solidify, she quickly poured in the cold rice. Then, she used a spatula to quickly stir-fry the rice until every grain was covered with a layer of egg. After the rice was heated, she added the chopped green onions and carrots and quickly stir-fried them. Chapter 526 Egg Fried Rice 2. A moment later, the rich scent of eggs mixed with rice wafted over, causing Xiaodetzi, who was standing nearby, to swallow his saliva. The young helper who was stoking the fire was stunned when he saw the golden egg fried rice. He had never known that fried rice could be eaten this way. However, Zhouing did not have the time to pay attention to them. She quickly took out a huge bowl, scooped all the egg fried rice into it, and immediately put it into the thermal container. Finally, she picked up the box and asked Xiaodetzi, "Do we need to prepare smaller bowls and spoons? If not, we can leave." "No need, no need. Everything is ready over there." Xiaodetzi responded, then quickly brought her to the main courtyard. That's right. For the sake of safety, King Rui arranged for the emperor and the others to sit at a separate table in the main courtyard. There were also people guarding the entrance. When the 2 of them went in, they were checked to make sure that there had no weapons before they were let in. After entering the house, the Empress Dowager stopped Zhouing from bowing, saying, "Forget the pleasantries and please hurry up serving the egg-fried rice."
Yes.
Zhouing responded, then went forward to open the thermal container. After placing the bowl of egg-fried rice on the table, she retreated to the side and waited. "Not bad, not bad. It's indeed very fragrant, and the color is also beautiful." The Empress Dowager nodded in satisfaction. Yes, her cooking is not inferior to the imperial chefs in the palace. The emperor nodded in agreement. Although the empress didn't like Zhouing, she had to admit that her cooking was excellent. She immediately asked her personal palace maid to test for poison with a silver needle. After confirming there was no problem, the palace maid immediately scooped a small bowl for each of them. The 3 immediately picked up their spoons and started eating. In a short while, everyone finished their small bowl. The emperor nodded in satisfaction and said, "Xiaodetzi reward." "Thank you, Your Highness. This commoner will take her leave." Zhouing quickly stepped forward and said, Remember to come to the palace to make hot pot the day after tomorrow." The emperor nodded and reminded Zhouing. Zhouing immediately retreated after hearing that. Xiaodetzi chased after her and handed over 2.5 gold nuggets. "This is the emperor's reward." "Thank you." Zhouing thanked him politely, accepted the reward, and turned to leave. When she returned to the banquet, it was almost over. Only Mingyu and Yang Wanning were still waiting inside. Seeing her coming back in, Mingyu immediately asked, "What did Zhou Huaiming ask you to do? What took you so long?" Zhouing didn't hide anything from them and told them about the egg-fried rice. When Mingyu heard that, she remembered the hot pot from the other day and immediately said, "Sister Zhou, I want to eat egg fried rice tonight too. Zhou shook her head. Let's just stir-fry some dough. We don't have any good rice, and lower-grade rice won't taste good either. Haiteng and her husband were familiar with the ingredients available in the manor, so Zhou did not dare take out any of her rice from her interspace. I have some at home. 111, get someone to send it over later. Mingyu replied. All right, don't mind if I use up all of it. Seeing that she could not refuse, Zhou had no choice but to agree. She looked at Yang Wanning and said, Come with us tonight. They'll send someone to escort you back after dinner. Perfect. Then I want stand-on ceremony. After that, the three of them returned to Zhou Ying's residence. After Zhou Huaiming finished his meal, he said to Gu Chengruwei and Yang Zipeng, the son of King An, you two continue. I have to interrogate a criminal. A criminal? Yang Zipeng asked. Zhou Huaiming didn't hide anything and told them someone had bumped into and stopped the wedding envoy earlier. When Yang Zipeng heard this, he knew it was being taken seriously, not because of the incident itself, but because of its implications. Gu Chengruwei naturally knew this as well. The two of them asked at the same time, Do you need help? Chapter 527 The End of the Chui Family 1. I can handle this small matter for now. You guys should stay behind and help King Rui send the guests off. Zhou Huaiming then stood up and walked out. He could not let the two of them get too close to him and King Rui for now. Otherwise, they would also be in danger. Gu Chengruwei and Yang Zipeng looked at each other and got up to get busy. Zhou Huaiming had found the camp of the patrolling soldiers in the eastern city and the old man and his granddaughter, who had been bullied. Before he could speak, the girl knelt down and begged, Please save us. Please, get up. I'm here to deal with this matter. After Zhou Huaiming finished speaking, he invited the two of them to sit down and asked, Have you two eaten? Yes, the officials here gave us a bowl of flour paste each, the old man replied. That's great. Please, tell me what happened. Who were those people who threatened to sell your granddaughter? The leader who captured us is called Brother Hu, and he's someone who is in charge of giving out and collecting back tokens. Tokens? Yes, tokens. When winter came, my son caught a cold and fell ill. However, all the valuables we had were exchanged for food. We had no choice but to borrow 10 taels of silver for 3 months with a 30% interest rate, represented by those tokens. Unfortunately, my son still didn't get well. My son had just passed the 7th day when they came for us. It hasn't even been 3 months since winter. Do you know why they are suddenly in a rush to collect the money? I'm not clear about this, but from what they said, it seems that their master is in urgent need of silver. This is why they are in a hurry to recover their capital. They even said that the interest could be reduced by half. But in our family, only the two of us are worth some money. So, short of silver? Someone who is in the loan shark business is short on silver? Zhou Huaiming had thought of the Yang family when he said this, as they were the only ones really short of money. Do you know who the person behind them is? I'm really not sure about that. We just borrowed the money from Brother Hu. Are you sure what you've said is true? I'm sure. If I tell a lie, 111 be struck by lightning and die a horrible death. Me too. Everything we said is true. All right, you two wait here for a while. They'll be right back. After Zhou Huaiming finished speaking, he went to look for the two people who had been caught earlier. Ultimately, he was told that the two of them had run away. After Zhou Huaiming heard this, he stared at the soldier in front of him with a sharp gaze and asked, Are you sure they ran away on their own and not because you let them go? General Zhou, they really ran away while we were eating. The soldier replied in fear. Are you all good for nothings? It's fine if you didn't catch them all, but how could you lose the ones we caught? One think it's time for you to remove your uniform. Zhou Huaiming turned around and walked out immediately after. However, after taking 2 steps, he stopped and commanded, What are you waiting for? Get your people to spread out and look for those people. Yes, yes. 111 get right to it. The soldier saluted and quickly ran off. Zhou Huaiming sent the 2 victims back home, and at the same time, he had 2 subordinates temporarily protect their safety. He turned around and went to the admiral's office. He wanted to see who had the guts to dabble in the loan shark business in the capital. Lord Yin saw Zhou Huaiming coming over in a huff and stood up in a daze. Nephew Zhou? Aren't you accompanying the third prince and hosting the banquet? Chapter 528 The End of the Chui Family 2. Sorry to disturb you, Uncle Yin, but one have a favor to ask. Zhou Fluiming cupped his fists and bowed. Oh, do tell. Lord Yin asked him after he sat down. Zhou Fluiming didn't stand on ceremony and told him how the wedding envoy had been forced to stop. Fai continued. One feel that there was something fishy about this matter, so I wanted to find those people and their master. After hearing this, Lord Yin felt that Zhou Fluiming was making a mountain out of a molehill. After all, it was not uncommon for people to loan out high-interest loans, especially since the past few years have seen so many natural disasters. However, these were usually done by people at the lower end of society and could not cause any problems at large. However, when he thought of Sun Miaoka, he honestly felt a little guilty. In addition, they were relatives, so he decided to investigate and see if someone was behind this. Thus, he replied, all right, they'll give the order to look for the person. Are you going to wait here for the news? Or, if there is something, let me know at King Rui's residence. One have to return there now. All right, they'll send someone to inform you when I catch the person. After Lord Yin finished speaking, he called someone in. Meanwhile, Zhou Fluiming stood up, bid farewell, and returned to King Rui's residence. For hours later, Lord Yin sent someone to deliver a letter. However, only Brother Hu and the other two were captured, with the other two already dead. Zhou Fluiming was even more certain that someone was up to something. He informed King Rui of this and rushed to the admiral's office. When Lord Yin, who was waiting in the room, saw him enter, he immediately led him to the cell. Brother Hu and the other two are quite stubborn. I'm afraid we won't be able to get anything out of them. Where are the bodies of the other two? I've temporarily placed it in the government office, but I've already informed the family members to come and get them. Don't let them take it away first and carry it directly to the prison cell. It might be useful. Lord Yin shook his head. I'm afraid it's useless. We've tried. Is that so? It looks like they're really stubborn. They'll meet them. Zhou Fluiming quickened his pace after he finished speaking. When he arrived at the cell, he saw Brother Hu and the other two still hanging on the rack, covered in blood. Zhou Fluiming went forward to check them out. He's really a tough guy, enduring such a serious injury and still not making a sound. When he saw some alcohol beside him, he picked it up and poured it directly on their wounds. As expected, the three of them immediately screamed in pain. Seeing this, Zhou Huiming walked up to the person screaming the loudest and said, I believe you have seen the corpses of your two companions. However, they are much luckier than you. At least they can still leave a corpse behind, but you might not be so lucky. If you want to kill or cut me up, do it. If one frown, they'll be your grandson. Don't. I don't want a grandson like you. I'm afraid that the coffin of my ancestor will pop out, and they will slap me for having such an unfilial grandson. One heard from a friend that there's a punishment called the tiger stool, which is simple and effective. Well, then, I can finally try it out with you guys. After Zhou Fluiming finished speaking, he asked the guard to bring a chair, a stool, for ropes, and some bricks. After they were ready, they began instructing the guards on how to use it. When they had just added 2 bricks, the arrogant, hardy man had turned pale and terrified. Zhou Fluiming saw this and asked, How does it taste? Have another brick. One want to see how many bricks you can take. Don't. What do you want to know? 111 tell you. The man cried with an aggrieved expression. Chapter 529 The End of the Chui Family 3. Brother Hu panicked and immediately yelled, You coward! Do you have any backbone? Without waiting for Xiaoya, the interrogated man, to speak, Zhou Huiming sneered, Yo, as expected of their leader. So you think you can endure this? Come, let's see how many bricks you can take. Xiaoya looked at Brother Hu expectantly. He wanted to let his leader have a taste of this tiger stool and see if he would still be able to stay quiet. The guards immediately changed Brother Hu into the contraption excitedly. If the effect were good, it would save them a lot of effort when interrogating other criminals in the future. After Brother Hu was tied up, The guards didn't wait for Zhou Weiming's instructions and directly threw 2 bricks at him. Brother Hu immediately broke out in a cold sweat from the pain. This simple and crude interrogation method was really killing him. Zhou Huiming saw this and laughed gloatingly. Add another piece. He's the leader, ain't it? 2 bricks are too little for someone like him. The guard immediately added another brick. This time, Brother Hu couldn't hold on anymore and screamed in pain. He could even feel that his leg was about to break. He kept struggling, and when the rope was pulled to its limit, Brother Hu finally heaved a sigh of relief. I'm impressed. What a man of steel. Let's add another brick. Zhou Huiming gave Brother Hu a thumbs up. The guards moved again, but it was getting difficult to add the brick this time. Brother Hu also felt that his leg would break if this brick were added. It would be broken by pure force. Just thinking about it made his scalp tingle. After hesitating momentarily, he shouted, "Stop adding! Stop adding! I'll talk, I'll talk." Lord Yan, who was watching the show with his hands behind his back, said, "It looks like this tiger stool is much more effective than whipping." Zhou Huiming smiled and asked the people to start recording his statement. With Brother Hu's agreement, the interrogation was quick. In a short while, they had revealed everything they knew. However, they did not say it was the Yang family. Instead, they gave up a person called Master One. Lord Yin immediately sent someone to invite Master One over. After going through the tiger stool, Master One confessed quickly. Not only did he admit that he had spent money to save the 2 men captured earlier, but he also confessed that his higher-ups were the Chui family. In the end, Lord Yin ordered his subordinates to hand Master One to the Ministry of Justice. They quickly pounced on the Chui family after that. After receiving a tip, the Chui family was about to escape but was blocked. Zhou Huiming brought them directly to the Ministry of Justice. In order to survive, the Chui family had no choice but to give up the Yang family's Madam and Mrs. Chui. King An, the Minister of Justice, who had mentally prepared for this, immediately dispatched someone to the Yang residence to arrest them. By the time Yang Shiqing received the news, it was already a foregone conclusion. However, for the sake of Yang Shiqing's safety and to leave a way out for themselves, the 2 women did not choose to out him. However, King An only sneered at their stubbornness. He did not believe that just these 2 women could run such a major operation. At the same time, Zhouing told Gu Chungrui about Yang Wanning's intention. After Gu Chungrui, King Rui, and Zhou Huiming discussed it, King Rui ordered the servants of his royal residence to spread the news that the Yang family was pressing for his dowry. Therefore, the next morning, Yang Shiqing was suspended by the emperor for failing his duty. After leaving the palace, Yang Shiqing once again faced everyone's contempt and disdain. The moment he found out what was happening, he almost exploded in anger. When Yang Shiqing returned home, Yang Wanyu, who was waiting at the door, immediately rushed over and asked, "Father, have you asked King An about grandmother and mother? When can they be released?" Yang Shiqing looked at her and didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, "Did your mother ask Yang Wanning to request King Rui's dowry in advance?" Choter 530 The end of the Chui family. 4. I only heard about it this morning. Yang Wanyu's expression froze for a moment, and then she clasped her fingers uneasily. Yang Shiqing looked at her guilty look and replied coldly, "Since you know, why didn't you stop it? Our family isn't at the end of its rope, no? How much more of my dignity do you want to ditch?" But, Yang Shiqing laughed and said, "What do you think you are doing? All you want is to gather your dowry and to get married in glory." He gave her a hard slap and continued, "I'm ruined. If you still want to get married, go marry a tramp." After saying that, he went straight to Yang Wanning's small courtyard. After entering the courtyard, he saw Yang Wanning embroidering and stepped forward to kick her. Yang Wanning had noticed him when he entered, so she did not dodge when she saw him kicking her, but she was not stupid enough to take the kick directly. She purposefully moved backward when he kicked her to lessen the force of the blow, but she nonetheless fell to the ground. Then, she looked at him with an aggrieved expression and asked, "Father, what happened? Why are you kicking your daughter? You're not my daughter, and one don't have a stupid daughter like you." When Yang Wanning heard this, she understood that her cousin had settled their plan. She was elated but still asked with a blank expression, "Where do you get this from?" "Let me ask you, did you ask King Rue for his betrothal gift in advance through Guqing Rue?" Yang Wanning acted stunned, bit her lip, and hesitated to speak. "Yes, but I didn't want to, but grandmother." Yang Shiqing understood immediately that it must have been Madame Cui who pressured Yang Wanning to do this. Thinking of this, he harbored hatred for Madame Cui. She knew how much he had suffered over the years for his reputation. However, because of a few words from her niece, Mrs. Cui, she disregarded her son's reputation for Yang Wanyu's dowry. Again, he berated Yang Wanning in a bad mood, saying, "Are you stupid? What will King Rue think of you in the future? Didn't you always ask us to listen to grandmother? Do you know that the betrothal gift is for Wanyu as her dowry?" "I know." "Then why did you? Hasn't my mother always been the head of the family? Didn't my mother's dowry fall into the hands of her and my grandmother? Chunglin and I only want to grow up safely." When Yang Wanning said this, a hint of mockery flashed in her eyes. Although Yang Shiqing didn't see her mocking gaze, he could tell from her tone that she was resentful. He narrowed his eyes and said, "So you went with the flow. Why didn't you ask for my opinion first? Ever since the Gu family was raided, have you even listened to us once? You even ignored my mother's requests before she passed away. Do you think I would still look for you?" A sharp glint flashed across his eyes after Yang Shiqing heard her dissatisfaction and hatred. He then asked, "So you aren't even considering your future? If you do this, you'll be looked down upon by others in the future. King Rue wouldn't be so superficial. Besides, the clothes Mrs. Cui prepared for me during the palace banquet had already exposed my status in the family. Do you think he wouldn't know of this?" "You, big sister, how can you talk to father like that?" Yang Wanyu walked over and gloated. "At least, better than you. For the sake of a grand marriage, you ignored our family's current situation and ruined everything." Yang Wanning turned her head and mocked. Yang Wanyu heard her words and immediately remembered the slap she had just received. She immediately panicked and retorted, "You're talking nonsense. What does this have to do with me? Those things were all orchestrated by mother." Chapter 531, The End of the Cui Family. 5. You're such a good daughter. If it weren't for your complaining, would mother be worried? If she wasn't in a hurry, would she force me to beg for my betrothal gift? Would she think of desperate ways to recover the money? Now that grandmother and mother have been arrested, you've pushed away all responsibility. Do you still have any conscience? I'll fight it out with you." Yang Wanyu shouted indignantly and rushed toward her. Yang Wanning didn't shirk and grabbed Yang Wanyu's wrist. She pressed her down and said, "How dare you refuse to admit responsibility? Who's the one who keeps asking for her dowry every day? Let go of me. I was never a part of this." Yang Wanyu struggled and shouted, "You know very well whether or not you were a part of this." Yang Shiqing looked at them arguing and shouted, "All right, all of you shut up. Look at how you are acting. Did you forget you are ladies from a noble family?" After saying that, he turned around and walked out. At the same time, he was highly disappointed in Yang Wanyu. Just like Yang Wanning had said, no matter what, her mother and Madame Cui were sent to prison because of her. Not only did she not feel guilty, but she also pushed all her responsibilities away. Would he be able to rely on such a daughter in the future? When he passed the garden, he saw the servants chatting in groups. He immediately went to the butler and scolded, "If they want to continue working, work as they should. Get lost otherwise. This old servant will definitely manage them better." The butler immediately replied carefully, "If there's a next time, one won't let this go so easily." Yang Shiqing returned to the study after saying that. The butler touched his forehead and muttered, "Sigh, I guess it's up to me to take all that pent-up anger away." Although he was unhappy, he still gathered the servants together and gave them a round of instructions. Yang Shiqing thought about it and felt he should visit Mrs. Cui, especially his mother. Otherwise, he would be criticized by others for being unfilial. He changed into his regular clothes. At the same time, he asked the maidservants to pack some cotton clothes and blankets. He then carried the clothes directly to the Ministry of Justice to see if he could get at least one of them out of prison. After learning of his intentions, King shook his head. You've already been suspended. Don't get involved in this matter. I can't make any decision on this. Let's just wait for the Emperor's judgment. Ugh, then. Can I go in and send them some cotton clothes? This is fine. King nodded and stood up, asking his attendant to bring young Shirching to the prison cell. Young Shirching was shocked by the cold air inside when they entered the cell. He couldn't help but shiver. At the same time, he was secretly glad that he had brought some cotton clothes and blankets for them. Otherwise, it would be uncertain if they could even come out alive. He walked to the door of the prison cell where the two women were. He then saw the two of them shivering under one blanket through the bars. Mother, your son is here to see you. When the aunt and niece heard his voice, they immediately turned their heads. After confirming that it was him, Mrs. Chui immediately helped Madame Chui up and walked over happily. Master, you're finally here to pick us up. I can't free you two for the time being, but I've brought you some cotton coats and blankets. Young Shirching pointed at the two big bags the prison guard had brought over after checking. What do you mean? Didn't we confess? Madame Chui grabbed the bars and asked anxiously. Yes, master. The Chui family has been raided, and all the silver has been confiscated. Mrs. Chui echoed. This matter has to wait for the Emperor's decision. I've already been suspended from my position. Young Shirching shook his head. At that moment, the warden opened the cell door and threw two bags in. This problem of yours has blown up, and because of this, the third prince's wedding has been disrupted. After saying that, he locked the door and looked at Young Shirching. Lord Yang, you only have 15 minutes. After saying that, he turned around and left. Chapter 532 The End of the Chui Family 6. How could this be? Madame Chui panicked and shouted, Son, you must save me. I'll do my best. Take care of yourselves here for the next few days. Sigh, we will. Mrs. Chui grabbed Young Shirching's clothes and pulled him over. She whispered in a panic, Master, master, she's back. She's here to take revenge on us. If she hadn't stolen all the valuable things in our family, all these things wouldn't have happened at once. What do you mean? Are you saying that Gu Chengrue is the culprit? Young Shirching asked in surprise. He believed that Gu Chengrue had deliberately spread the news that they wanted dowries from the third prince. However, he didn't believe that Gu Chengrue was the person who robbed them. He didn't have the ability to do so, not even the third prince. No, it's Mrs. Gu. Mrs. Chui then told him about how Mrs. Gu attempted to kill her. She added, Originally, I wanted to invite a monk over to suppress her soul, but I didn't expect. Before she could finish her sentence, Young Shirching stopped her and said, What nonsense are you talking about? It's just a dream. Many people in this world have done worse acts, but since when have the dead taken revenge on the living? It was simply nonsense. Master, it's true. It's true. After Mrs. Gu came to me, our residence was robbed the next morning. You have to believe me. Mrs. Chui tried persuading him. Son, it's better to believe it than not. Madame Chui echoed. Then, she remembered Young Wanning's abnormality and said, Young Wanning too. Ever since the Gu family came, she's not as obedient as before. Why isn't she? Didn't she follow your instructions yesterday and ask for her betrothal gift from King Rue in advance? Otherwise, this wouldn't have spread like wildfire and made me a laughing stock. What do you mean? Although Young Shirching was getting impatient, he still explained it to them a few times. She did it on purpose. She must have done it on purpose. Otherwise, with the relationship between King Rue and Gu Chengrue, how could it have been spread? There are many kinds of swordless battles in the imperial court. Since you have revealed your hand, how can you expect it not to be used against you? After Young Shirching finished speaking, he gave them a few more instructions before turning around and walking out. Aunt, what should we do now? Mrs. Chui looked at Young Shirching's back and asked anxiously. Shirching's official position has been suspended. What can we do? Madame Chui sagged and seemed to have instantly aged by more than 10 years. She knew very well that if even her son were suspended, the emperor would only be more ruthless toward the Chui family. She regretted everything. especially her greed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have ended up in this miserable state. How would she face the ancestors of the Chui family after she passed? Just the thought of it made her scalp numb. After young Shirching returned to the residence, he still felt that it was better to believe Mrs. Siwa's ramblings than not. Therefore, he decided to hire a monk to suppress the soul of Mrs. Gu in her coffin so that she would never be able to reincarnate. He went straight to Mrs. Siwa's room and took all her silver, surprised to find there were only less than 200 taels of silver. Ultimately, he even took out the title deeds of all the shops from the family's assets. Because he was afraid that someone was watching him, he did not dare touch the money in the manor. However, when he took out the title deed of the shops, he almost fainted from anger because the manor and shops were now under Yang Wanya's name. Chapter 533, Asking for help. Young Shirching didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this. Chui, you're such a good mother. If you weren't caught, would you have emptied the Yang family for that ingrate, Yang Wanyu? So, just in case, he kept everything away and placed it in a secret compartment inside his study. Of course, he wouldn't give Yang Wanyu a single cent as her dowry. He would just give her an ordinary manor and shop. As for the rest, he planned to ask the first prince to take back the 100,000 taels of silver from the manor and exchange it for some cloth and jewelry for her dignity. He didn't have any other way now. Thinking of this, he packed up his things and turned around to rush to the residence of Prince Hui. On the other end, after approving the memorial in the palace, Prince Hui and Prince Kong walked out together. After they came out, Prince Kong stepped forward and said, "Eldest brother, one heard that the Yang family is asking for betrothal gifts from third brother in advance to prepare dowry for your concubine. What a great idea they have. Spending third brother's money for another of his daughter's dowry. Your father-in-law sure is smart." How could Prince Hui not hear the sarcasm in his brother's words? Although he was unhappy, he still turned his head and smiled. "Why, fourth brother, if you're envious, I might also add some dowry for your consort. There's really no need. Although my in-laws aren't very rich, we can still afford the dowry." At this point, Prince Kong feared the first prince would turn hostile and immediately added, "Sorry, one got to go. One have to go back and prepare my betrothal gifts." After saying that, he strode towards the palace gates. Prince Hui was furious when he saw this. At the same time, he was also disgusted by Yang Shirching. It seemed that he had to find a successor as soon as possible, as he could not watch as the lucrative position of the Ministry of Revenue fell into the hands of others. As soon as he entered the house, he heard his gatekeeper report, "Your Highness, Lord Yang Shirching is waiting for you in the living room." Did he say anything? No, but he looks like he has something on his mind. Got it. After Prince Hui finished speaking, he thought of the upcoming marriage and hesitated for a moment before walking over. When Yang Shirching saw him come in, he immediately stood up and said, "This lowly official greets your highness. There's no need to be so polite. Sit." Prince Hui brushed Yang Shirching's bow away and walked straight to the seat of honor to sit down. After drinking a cup of tea, he asked, "Lord Yang, why are you here? I do have a small matter to discuss." After Yang Shirching finished speaking, he looked at the maidservant standing at the side. Prince Hui understood his intentions and waved his hand to instruct her to leave. Yang Shirching then told him his plan. When Prince Hui heard that it was because of Yang Wanya's dowry, he immediately got angry and asked, "Is the rumor in the morning true? Did you really ask for betrothal gifts from my third brother?" It was this lowly official's fault. This matter was arranged by my wife, and I really didn't know beforehand. When Prince Hui heard this, he slammed the table angrily and scolded, "Don't know this, don't know that. You just don't know anything, be it your daughter's dowry or the loan shark business the Chui family is doing. Why do one feel that the one in charge of the Yang family is your wife and not you?" Yang Shirching immediately lowered his head and did not dare to reply. When Prince Hui saw this, he was furious. However, when he thought of the evidence in his hands, he could only say, "I will help you gather 30 sets of dowry, and I won't be able to take out any more. As for the silver, you should keep it for yourself." Just buy something for your residence. I'm afraid I'm being watched now, so it's inconvenient for me to go and get it. Yang Shirqing hesitated and replied. Hearing this, Prince Hui was shocked and asked softly, Did you burn all the letters we exchanged previously? Is the silver safe? Chapter 534. A husband and wife. Getting along. Yang Shiqing's heart skipped a beat after hearing his question. In order to save his life, he could only brace himself and nod. Don't worry, I've destroyed all the letters after reading them. As for the silver, I've placed it in a fake, decorated mountain. But it's not the time to use it now. Prince Hui believed him when he heard that because he had never seen him touch the silver he gave him. He replied, How about this? I will lend you 50,000 taels of silver. Remember to return it. Thank you for your consideration, Your Highness. Yang Shirqing hurriedly bowed. Although 50,000 taels of silver was not a lot, it was enough to solve his urgent need. Follow me. After Prince Hui finished speaking, he brought him to his treasury and asked the butler to bring him 50,000 taels of silver. Yang Shirqing took it and thanked him. He did not stay for long and immediately turned around to leave. After returning home, he immediately slumped into his bed. Because he didn't know how long the lie he made up could last. He didn't know who had the gold, silver, and letters. Would that person bring his death to him? King Rui listened to Guard Chu's report on Yang Shiqing's whereabouts. When he heard that the first prince had lent Yang Shirqing 50,000 taels of silver, he said, Keep an eye on Yang Shirqing. We might be able to dig out more dirt on him. Yes, but what about Miss Yang? We don't have to worry about this. Gu Qingrui will handle it well. Roger that. As soon as Guard Chu left, Qing Tao knocked on the door and came in. This servant Qing Tao greets Your Highness. Princess Consort requested that I come to ask if you want to have lunch together. We'll go over after I'm done with my work, replied King Rui hesitantly. Yes. Qing Tao responded and turned to leave. Rui Wang was no longer in the mood to read more official documents and sat down to drink a cup of tea. He went out for a walk and went to the side hall before heading straight to the main courtyard. Sun Miaoka was sorting out her dowries in her room when she saw him coming in. She immediately came up to him and greeted King Rui politely. Welcome, Your Highness. King Rui looked at her allward walking posture, and his heart softened. He helped her up and replied, There's no need to be so polite. Thank you. I had someone prepare 2 meat dishes and 2 servings of vegetables, as well as a bowl of chicken soup. Is there anything else you want to add? No, your arrangements are good. After King Rui finished asking, he asked, Are you getting used to living here? If you need anything, you can tell me. If I'm not around, you can go to Uncle Feng too. There's no need, as everything is well prepared. Chapter 535. What a disaster. Sun Miaoka was surprised. She bit her chopsticks and replied with a blush, Thank you, Your Highness. At the same time, she was surprised and relieved. What surprised her was that she never expected him to serve her food personally. She was relieved he wasn't as cold as he looked on the surface, which gave her confidence in this marriage. King Rui nodded and did not reply. Instead, he stretched out his hand to reach for a steamed bun. Sun Miaoka hurriedly called out to him, Let me. After saying that, she brought the plate of steamed buns to him. King Rui picked one up and placed it inside his bowl, lowering his head to eat. The two of them didn't talk much after that, but they took care of each other, more or less. The two of them got along quite well. When Qing Tao saw this, she immediately walked out in the name of serving chicken soup. When she left the courtyard, tears flowed down uncontrollably. Honestly, she had always thought that her young miss could not let go of her cousin and would never get close to His Highness. It seemed that she was overthinking. In the palace, after the emperor finished the barely satisfactory egg fried rice made by the imperial chef, he asked, Oldly, Is Xiaoheng back? Not yet. But this old servant heard Chief Xiao mention he was going to the suburbs to look for the victim. The victim? Yes. It said that many people died because of the Chui family's loaning business. What a disaster! The emperor laughed mockingly at himself. Even the emperor, when the situation was at its worst 2 years ago, did not exploit the people. He even had to limit himself to one meat and one vegetable per meal. Instead, the Chui family dared to amass wealth wantonly. Unforgivable. He had to teach these servants of his a good lesson and make an example out of them. The emperor spoke up. Keep an eye on them. If Xiao Hong comes back, tell him to come see me as soon as possible. Yes, this old servant will remember it. After Eunuch Li finished speaking, he retreated to the side. The emperor got up and went back to the side hall to rest. They waited until the night before Xiao Hong returned. He handed a thick stack of confessions to the emperor. Your Majesty, I have already investigated the Chui family's crimes. Over the past 5 years, 368 civilians have died from loans from the Chui family. Over 1,000 girls were sold to the Red Chamber or elsewhere. Many also had their families broken up and their wives and children separated. Their total earnings over the years total about 150,000 silver. So, not only are they in the loan shark business, but they're also involved in trafficking women? Yes, but they only traffic young girls who owe them money. They didn't dabble in anything else. Are their relatives all dead, with so many people implicated? How come no one has reported this case? Angrily, the emperor demanded. Xiao Hong made an awkward laugh. At first, the victims did file a report. They were not only denied justice, but they were also taught a lesson. As a result, no one dared do so anymore. The emperor understood what had happened and asked, are the officials from back then still around? Yes, one of them has also entered the Ministry of Revenue. Good, very good. The emperor gritted his teeth. He ordered, arrest Yang Shiqing and all those officials. Send them to the Ministry of Justice. Also, get that so-called Master One, Brother Hu, and the others who helped them. Arrest them and confiscate their property. Yes, this subordinate will see to it immediately. Xiao Hong turned around and was about to leave after that. The emperor quickly called out to him, wait a minute, have you found any clues about Yang Shiqing's corruption? Chapter 536 Manner No. The Ministry of Revenue is like an iron bucket. The people I sent in couldn't come into contact with anything substantial. I'm afraid it'll take some time before there's news. Xiao Hong shook his head. You may leave. The emperor waved his hand in disappointment. He was getting worried about the situation at the Ministry of Revenue. It seemed that he had to break this deadlock. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know if the national treasury had been emptied that day. But who would be suitable? He flipped through the list of resumes of officials of the third rank and above. Zhou, on the other hand, had been watching the emperor's every move, curious about the Chui family's future. After receiving an answer from the emperor, she immediately told Gu Chengruwei, the emperor has sent people to capture Yang Shiqing. What should we do now? Should we send a message to Yang Wanning? No need. This has nothing to do with her. The less she knows, the better. Gu Chengruwei shook his head and replied, all right, but one don't know when they will be able to sever their father-daughter relationship. This is hard to say. Yang Shiqing won't let go unless it's necessary. If Yang Shiqing doesn't say anything, Yang Wanning mustn't take the initiative. Otherwise, her reputation would be ruined as an unfilial daughter. Zhou nodded in agreement. Usually, if the parents were still around, it would be difficult for a person to separate from their family, let alone sever a father-daughter relationship. She then asked, by the way, how are the vegetables growing in the manor? They're fine. The spinach and rapeseed have already grown tender seedlings. As long as any extreme weather doesn't appear, we might be able to plant another crop before the new year. Do you want to try garlic? It's better not to. It's not appropriate to take out the seeds now. Let's put it off until next year. Oh, I've already asked Brother Zhou about the farm you asked me to investigate. It belongs to neither Prince Hui nor the Yang family, but someone called Wang Li. However, he did not recognize this person. Could it be an alias? It could be, or it could be someone under Prince Hui. That's true. There aren't even any photos of the person right now. For someone with high status like Prince Hui, it's too easy to fabricate a fake identity. By the way, Brother Zhou said it's impossible for us to buy a farm. We can only think of a way to build it ourselves. However, he did recommend a place to me. It's at the foot of West Mountain, not far from the Hot Spring Manor. It said that place is overgrown with thorns and weeds. It was about 2,000 acres, and there's a river on the side. If the place is rebuilt, it will be enough to supply the restaurant. Is there any flaw? Otherwise, such a large area wouldn't have been left empty all this time, right? First, it's too remote. Second, the land is poor. When the Ming dynasty was just established, an official took a fancy to that piece of land and planted many peach trees. However, the trees either fell ill or the peaches that bore were small and sour, so he gave up. Later, when it fell into the hands of his descendants, it remained empty until now. However, from his description, it was because the land was slightly acidic and unsuitable for growing northern plants. So, I want to take some time to go over and take a look. I want to bring some samples back for an experiment. If it's suitable, I will buy it. Sure, let's go take a look at it. Remember that watermelons like acidic soil. We can plant watermelons and earn a lot of money from selling them. Why don't we go together tomorrow? It'll save you the trouble of running back and forth. Zhouing said, it's better not to. The capital will be changing rapidly over the next 2 days. We can't treat it as if we were blind. Besides, you still have to enter the palace tomorrow to make hot pot. Chapter 537 Getting Caught, that's true. Be careful. Zhouing want to get busy after that. Gu Chungrui saw that there were ripe tomatoes in the field. He picked one, washed it, and ate it as he walked toward the grassland. At the same time, young Shirching had finished his meal and was thinking about preparing a dowry for young Wanyu in his study. Suddenly, he heard the sound of hurried footsteps. Before he could come back to his senses, he saw 2 imperial guards rush in and grab him. Young Shirching was stunned at first, but when he returned to his senses, he panicked. He looked at Xiao Hong, standing at his door, and asked, Chief Xiao, what's going on? Lord Yang, what do you think is going on here? Young Shirching was surprised by the rhetorical question, but quickly realized the emperor must have ordered his capture. His mood immediately wilted. Xiao Hong saw that he had calmed down and waved his hand. Take him away. On the way, young Shirching asked Chief Xiao about the reason for his capture. Although he didn't get definite information, he knew things weren't good when he saw the murderous look on Chief Xiao's face. He got uneasy. Could it be that the emperor knew about his corruption? No way that was the case. If the emperor knew about his corruption, he would not be arresting him but ransacking his homes. Thinking of this, he heaved a sigh of relief. The first prince would definitely think of a way to save him, as long as it wasn't about his corruption and he didn't relent. Soon, young Zhiqing was thrown into prison at the Ministry of Justice. As soon as he laid down in his cell, he heard a series of wails and howls. Dozens of people were thrown in, one after another. 5 people were assigned to the cell he was in. Initially, he wanted to hear what they had to say to see if he could figure out why he was suddenly jailed. However, after 15 minutes, the 5 men just found a place to lean against and fell asleep. He had no choice but to pull some of his hair down and make a sorry appearance. He moved to a thin, middle-aged man and asked, Brother, what did you do? Why are there so many people coming in all of a sudden? That person glanced at him and saw that he was rich and noble. He immediately replied in a bad mood. Tell me who you are and what you have done first. My son gambled away all our family property, and we're being chased by people everywhere. I don't have a place to hide, so one bribed the guards to come in and hide. The man was stunned at first, then gave a thumbs up, saying, Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We would have starved to death by now if everyone was all as cunning as you. Young Shirching paused and deliberately looked at him in panic. You're from the casino? No, but am also responsible for collecting debts. If I knew the higher-ups would be so strict, I wouldn't have joined a group. Now, I'm afraid I'll be exiled even if I survive this ordeal. When young Shirching heard him say that, he immediately thought of the Chui family's loan shark business. He quickly asked the man whether they were part of the Chui family's group. How did you know? The man asked, looking at him warily. I heard about it. This has spread throughout the prison over the past 2 days. Looks like we're really screwed this time, the man said dejectedly. After realizing what was happening, young Shurching didn't dare ask any more questions. These people would most likely tear him apart if his identity were revealed. After young Shurching had been captured from the Yang residence, Yang Wanning and Yang Wanyu also received the news. By the time they chased after him, he had already left. Yang Wanyu immediately ordered Yang Wanning, "Hurry up and beg King Ru to see if he can save father as soon as possible." Yang Wanning sneered after hearing this. "Why don't you go to Prince Hui? Mother has a good relationship with the Empress, so begging them will give you a better chance." After saying that, she just returned to her small courtyard. Chapter 538. Persuading him. When young Wanyu saw this, she was so anxious that she stomped her feet. However, she also knew that if she went to look for Prince Hui now, she would always have to lower her head before him after they got married. This would be detrimental to her future. But if she didn't save her father, what would happen to her marriage? Her dowry and her wedding would all be ruined. You're the eldest in the family. Are you just going to watch your parents get jailed and not care? So now you think me of your elder sister? I've never heard you call me sister once. HJH, it's too late. Begging anyone won't help us. You'd better return to bed. We'll go to prison tomorrow and ask father for his opinion. After Yang Wanning finished speaking, she left. When she returned to her courtyard, Chuanchi helped her wash up, hesitantly asking, "Young miss, are you really planning to meddle in your father's matters? I heard the people who took master away were the palace guards. No matter what, I have to do something to show action. By the way, are the servants in the courtyard obedient now?" "Yes. Ever since Mrs. Chui was arrested, everyone has been doing their best. We can't relax at times like this. Otherwise, if something happens, it'll be bad." "I understand." Chuanchi nodded solemnly. The next day, Gu Chungrui brought more than 10 sticks of roasted donkey meat and left for the manor in a carriage with Lin Etian. Meanwhile, Zhouing went to the kitchen to prepare the base and dipping sauce for her hot pot. When she came out, she saw Zhou Dong yawning in the distance. She called him and asked, "Brother Zhou Dong, what's wrong? Those who don't know better would think you were out late stealing last night. I wish one had the skills of a thief. At least I can earn money quickly. After over half a month of learning, I finally understand that doing business is complicated and difficult." Zhouing smiled and asked, "So, what are you thinking? Do you want to quit?" "No. What other options do I have? Farming is even more tiring." Zhou Dong paused and continued, "To be honest, although one don't have freedom and sometimes I get beaten up, my life is pretty comfortable. At least one don't have to worry about food and clothing." Zhouing secretly rolled her eyes after hearing that. That was because he had his parents protecting him. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know how he died. So, she still tried to persuade him. "Everything has a process. You've been living too comfortably, so you can't stand the sudden change. After some time, I'm sure it will get easier once you're familiar with your work. Just like when you started farming, wasn't that as difficult as well?" "That's right. All right, I'll have to leave. Otherwise, it'll be late." Zhou Dong nodded in agreement, then turned around and ran out. Zhouing walked around the residence. After seeing that everything was well cleaned, she returned to her courtyard. She thought of what Gu Chungrui had told her, to monitor the capital closely. So, she poured a cup of tea, took a book as a cover, and spread her divine scents to the Yang residence. Coincidentally, she saw Yang Wanning and Yang Wanyu carrying bags as they left their residence. A trace of astonishment flashed across her eyes. It would not be an exaggeration to say that these two people were like fire and water. Zhouing couldn't believe there would be a day when they would walk together in such harmony. After following them for a while, she realized they were sending young Shurching some cotton clothes and quilts. Zhouing followed them as well. However, when they arrived at the Ministry of Justice's prison, the two women were denied entry, regardless of whether they were delivering silver or mentioning Prince Hui or Prince Rue. They could only leave the things they had brought behind and walk back with a heavy heart. Zhouing entered the prison and found King and interrogating people from the Chui family. In order to get some confessions as soon as possible, King and even busted out the tiger stool. But in the end, they couldn't find any evidence that could convict young Shurching. Chapter 539 announcement. At this point, King An knew that if he wanted to convict young Shurching, he could only work on Mrs. and Madame Chui. However, both of them knew very well that if they exposed young Shurching, the Yang and Chui families would be finished. Only when young Shurching was safe could their children be safe, and only then would they have a chance to turn the tables. Zhouing admired their perseverance, but she knew that nothing must happen to young Shurching now, especially before young Wanning cut ties with him. Therefore, she didn't do anything and obediently waited for the verdict. King An tortured them a few times, and even when the two of them fainted, he still did not get an answer. He could only helplessly tell the emperor about his result. When the emperor saw the Chui family's confession, a murderous look flashed in his eyes. He never expected the Chui family's initial 20,000 taels of silver to grow to a total of 200,000. These were collected from middle and lower-class farmers and small businessmen with no foundation. It could be seen how many people they had harmed over the years. It was probably much more than what Xiao Hong had investigated. After that, he asked once again, "The two didn't relent?" "No, they've already been tortured, but they still haven't relented. Since they are willing to be the mastermind, then let them be." After the emperor finished speaking, he took out a large piece of paper and wrote quickly. After he finished writing, he handed it to King and posted, "The Chui family and their masterminds will be beheaded at noon tomorrow. The rest will be sent to the salt fields and mines." "Yes, 111 head to it immediately." King An paused for a moment before nodding. At the same time, he was puzzled. If the emperor was so ruthless toward Mrs. Chui and her family, why would he let young Shurching go lightly? Of course, he didn't know the emperor was using the deaths of the Chui family to warn those officials' wives to behave. As for young Shurching, he would keep him around until he collected more evidence of his corruption. At that time, he would finish him off. Another thing was that the two secondary consorts he had appointed were both young Shiching's daughters, so he wanted to gauge the reactions of his two sons. When the announcement was posted, the entire capital exploded in surprise. Of course, the people at the lower levels cheered, especially those who had borrowed money from them. Once the Chui family perished, they wouldn't need to pay back their loans anymore. As for the upper class, especially the officials, they went home in unison at noon to warn the womenfolk that they should behave themselves. Suddenly, those who had illegal businesses retracted everything, even if they lost money. When the first prince received the news, he was nervous. He was afraid that young Shurching would beg him for help. If he refused, who knew what young Shurching would do next? On the other hand, the third prince did not care about this and just went about his daily business. As for young Wanning, he was fully supportive of her after learning from Gu Chungrui that she wanted to leave the young family. After all, young Shurching was his oldest brother's aide. He didn't want to have anything to do with him. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if he was schemed against one day. At the Yang family, young Wanyu was panicking because she knew very well that without the protection of her grandmother and mother, her status in the Yang residence might be even worse compared to young Wanning. Just as she was about to go wild with worry, young Chenglin and young Chungsun rushed back. Looking at their house, which clearly showed signs of decline, they understood that their families might be finished. Therefore, they ran anxiously to their sisters. Young Chungsen entered young Wanyu's courtyard and saw her worried face. He quickly went up and asked, "Sister, what is going on? Are grandmother and mother really going to be executed?" Chapter 540 Choices 1. Young Wanyu felt a little comforted after seeing her brother, so she immediately told him what had happened in the past few days. "Chungsin, what do you think we should do now? Father was really jailed?" "Yes, but the announcement didn't mention anything about father. One don't know if he'll come out. Let's hurry up and find Prince Hui. We can't let grandmother and mother really be executed. If that happens, it will affect our future." Young Wanyu froze for a moment. Although she agreed with his words, she still reprimanded him straight-faced. "At a time like this, you are still thinking about your future. What else can we do? We must think of a way to save them as soon as possible." After young Wanyu heard this, her face was filled with reluctance. If she were to go, it would significantly lower her position in Prince Hugh's residence. Hurry up. If father gets a stepmother, we won't have it good in the future. After young Chengsen finished speaking, he dragged her out. When young Wanyu heard the word stepmother, she remembered young Wanning's treatment and finally followed him out. Young Chenglin anxiously ran into young Wanning's small courtyard, stunned to see his sister sitting in her room leisurely drinking tea. He asked unhappily, "Sis, why are you still in the mood to drink tea?" Young Wanning ignored him and poured him a cup of tea. "Drink some tea to moisten your throat." Young Chenglin sat in annoyance when he saw her acting like nothing had happened. Still, he picked up his teacup. The tea was scalding hot and almost burned his tongue off. In addition, his trembling hand spewed some tea, scalding it. His cup fell to the ground and broke into pieces. Young Wanning put down her teacup and said, "Don't worry. The tea is a little hot, but it won't burn your hand. It'll be fine. Don't you understand? If you're in a hurry, you won't even be able to drink a cup of tea properly." Young Chengsen jolted and asked thoughtfully, "Sis, what do you mean? You came back because of grandmother and mother's execution tomorrow, right?" "Yes, there are also people who say father has been jailed." "That's right. Father was taken away yesterday." Young Wanning gestured for him to sit down and told him what had happened in the past few days. "I'm sure you've heard that the emperor handwrote this announcement. When have you heard that the emperor changes an imperial edict? If I'm right, the Chui family must have harmed many people through their loan shark business. Therefore, it was useless to plead for mercy. As for your father, since the announcement did not mention him, he's fine for now. Moreover, his mother will be executed tomorrow. As her son, he would have to collect her corpse, so he would most likely come back tomorrow." But, at this moment, Chuanxi walked in and said, "Miss, I heard that the second miss and the second young master went to plead with Prince Hui. See, someone is more anxious than us. We just have to wait." Young Wanning concluded, "But father will blame us when he comes out. Chuanxi, stand guard outside. Don't let outsiders get close." Young Wanning said this to Chuanxi after hearing this. "Yes, Mississippi." After saying that, Chuanxi turned around and walked out. Only then did young Wanning tell him that Mrs. Chui had asked someone to put flecks of hardy ice plant in her tea. She added, "You also know that although our mother's body isn't well, she isn't weak to the point where a cold will kill her. So I suspect that mother might also have ingested some hardy ice plant. That's why." Chapter 541 Choices 2. Yang Qinglin's face was filled with disbelief. However, when he saw his sister's solemn expression and remembered the conversation between Mrs. Chui and her, he was convinced. However, was their mother's death really the fault of Mrs. Chui? Thinking of this, he looked at her and asked, "Is there any evidence to prove that mother was killed by Mrs. Chui? To be honest, I also thought she died of illness, but later one overheard she froze to death. When Cousin Zhou confirmed the hardy ice plant in my tea, I suddenly remembered the cause of mother's death. However, they did it too discreetly. The people who served mother were either sold or dismissed by Mrs. Chui. One can't verify it for sure." "Who said mother froze to death?" Yang Chenglin clenched his fists and asked with a darkened face. It was Yang Wanyu who accidentally let it slip. She said Mrs. Chui sent someone to cut off mother's charcoal supply. So, Yang Chenglin stood up immediately. Since it came from Yang Wanyu's mouth, it was basically confirmed. Thinking of this, he quickly ran out. He had to go to prison and ask his father if he knew about this. Young Wanning immediately grabbed him and asked, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to ask father. Do you think he will admit it?" "HJ2-inch sit down." Young Wanning pulled him back and sat him down, saying, "I didn't tell you before because I was afraid you would act impulsively. I'm telling you now, so we don't have to care about Mrs. Chui. It's their fate whether they live or not." Yang Wanning feared her brother would still make a fool of himself, so she stood up and said, "Let's go. We'll pick someone up." "Who? Do you still remember Mrs. Sun, who was by mother's side?" "I do. She's part of mother's dowry, someone who never married." "Yes, I think she should know something. Let's go to the manor and take a look." Yang Chunglin hesitated for a moment before nodding and following her out. After they went to the kitchen to get some food, they took Chuanxi with them and rode a carriage to the manor in the suburbs. Once they had left the range of Zhou Ying's divine senses, she no longer followed them. Instead, she focused her attention on Yang Wanyu. The two siblings were left alone in Prince Hugh's living room. There was not even a single person to serve them tea. After about 15 minutes, Yang Chungson stood angrily and said, "Sis, what is brother-in-law doing? We've been waiting for so long, but there's no one even here to greet us." Yang Wanyu smiled bitterly. She knew this would happen, but still held a glimmer of hope. "Let's wait a little longer. His Highness is busy. Isn't our issue more urgent?" Yang Chungson sat down angrily. However, no one came. Even Yang Chungson quickly understood that the first prince was turning a blind eye to them. The siblings looked at each other and got up to walk out. At this moment, Consort Hui walked over from afar. "Sister Yang, shouldn't you wait for a while? His Highness should be back soon." "If His Highness isn't in the residence, why didn't the servants say so earlier?" Yang Wanyu looked at her and asked indignantly. "Oh, my, such a temper. I just returned from my parents' home and didn't know there were guests. The servants should have guessed your intentions, so they left you for His Highness' presence. You should know that the members of the royal family and the first-grade officials are in the palace at this time." Consort Hui smiled and replied. However, today was an exception. The first prince did not enter the palace after breakfast. Instead, he stayed in his study with his advisors and did not come out. So, this meant the first prince's absence was definitely intentional. He refused to meet the young siblings. Chapter 542. Seeking help. Yang Wanyu didn't know how to respond to her words. At the same time, she was highly annoyed. She had been so worried that she had overlooked the fact that the first prince had left the palace to run an errand. She had damaged her reputation in the eyes of the consort, and this would be something to mock her for in the future. But remembering their purpose, she could only ask, "When will His Highness return?" "It's hard to say. We usually only have dinner together at night. The rest of the time depends on His Highness' mood. Of course, with such a major thing happening to the Yang family, he should be back soon if His Highness doesn't have anything important." "It's the same as not saying anything," Yang Wanning muttered to herself. She jolted after realizing the same thing. If the first prince had the intention to help, he would have gone to their place long ago. It was apparent that the first prince did not want to see them. Thinking of this, her heart sank. "Since Consort Hui already knows why we're here, he'll have to trouble you to pass on a message to His Highness. We'll have to take our leave for now." "I can pass on the message, but I cannot guarantee anything else." "Understood." After Yang Wanyu finished speaking, she dragged the reluctant Yang Chungsen out. After leaving the residence of Prince Hui, Yang Chungsen glared at her and questioned, "What are you doing? I don't believe they can't even afford to feed us lunch. We've been waiting for him so long. We might as well wait all the way." Yang Wanyu shook her head and brought him to their carriage. After they got on, she told him her guess. "I'm going to the palace to look for the 8th princess and see if she can put in a good word in front of the Empress. You better stay in the carriage and don't run around, understand? If even King Hui doesn't want to interfere, will the 8th princess do so? Let's just give it a try." Yang Wanyu smiled bitterly. After saying that, she requested her coachman to drive them to the palace. When they arrived at the palace gates, Yang Wanyu exited the carriage and went straight to the guards. After reporting her name, she handed over the token the 8th princess gave her. However, she was immediately chased to the side. "Go back. The 8th princess left early in the morning and isn't in the palace." "Where did she go?" "The princess' whereabouts are not something we can inquire about. I should be able to meet the Empress, no? The Empress is in charge of the 6 palaces and is very busy. Not everyone can see her just because they want to. You must have an invitation letter or someone to pick you up." Yang Wanyu pondered to herself. It wasn't so difficult to enter the palace back then. Could they deliberately ask these guards to block her from entering, trying to ignore her entirely? When she thought of this, a wave of hatred rose in her heart. So, they were discarded after their uses were done. Nevertheless, she still tried to persuade the guards. They'll have to trouble you to help me inform her. No matter what, I'm still Prince Hugh's concubine who is about to marry into the family. The guard's eyes flashed with mockery. He couldn't believe she still had the cheek to mention her marriage at such a time. He waved his hand and replied, "You can go and find King Hui then. You can't meet the Empress unless you're summoned." Yes, yes. King Hui is fine too. Isn't he in the palace too? We'll go look for him. The guard paused momentarily when he heard this, but he quickly understood that even King Hui did not want to see her. He pointed to the opposite side and said, "Go wait outside. I definitely can't let you in at this time." After the guard finished speaking, he ignored her entirely. Yang Wanyu was so angry that she almost wanted to go forward and tear him apart. However, she knew it was useless. She returned to the carriage and waited. Yang Chengxin saw her dejected look and immediately gritted his teeth. All of them, bastards. Chapter 543, Sending Hot Pot to the Palace. Shut up. Are you trying to go into an early grave too? Yang Wanyu immediately covered her brother's mouth and growled. Yang Chengxin's head cleared after being yelled at by her. He shut his mouth and stopped talking. Zhou Ying was just about to see King Hu's reaction to Yang Wanyu's visit when Shizhu suddenly ran in and said, "Madam, the people from the palace are here to pick you up. They're late. Go and get 2 copper pots for me." She stood up and went to the kitchen immediately. "Sister Haidang, no one came in all this time, right?" "Yes, I'm the only one here stewing the bone soup." "All right then, come with me to the palace. Remember, don't speak unless I ask you something." "I understand," Haidang responded, then put away the things she had prepared and placed them in a large food box. She called for Shizhu, and the 3 of them walked out together. Granny Lu, who was picking them up, only sized them up briefly before letting them into the carriage. When they got into the carriage, Granny Lu smelled a pungent and spicy smell. "Mrs. Zhou, did you bring your own seasonings?" "No, it's the prepared base and dipping sauce for the hot pot. When stir-frying the spicy base, the smell will be very choking, so one prepared it at home." "I see." Granny Lu nodded and checked the items they brought. After confirming there was nothing extra, she brought them into the palace. After entering the palace, Granny Lu brought them into the small kitchen of Longevity Palace. "All the ingredients are here. You can start preparing. We'll start on time at noon." "Granny Lu, one will need to know how many people will be there, so that I can prepare enough ingredients. 2 tables full. Prepare as much meat as possible." "Understood." After Zhou Ying finished speaking, she instructed them to get busy. Shizhu washed the vegetables while Haidang started plating. Zhou Ying cut off the fat and tender meat from 2 sheep, shaved them into thin slices, and handed them to Haidang for plating. After the hot pot was served, Zhou Ying baked some scallion pancakes for the palace servants to bring in. Soon after, Granny Lu entered and informed Mrs. Zhou. "Mrs. Zhou, the Empress Dowager said today is a family banquet, so she won't invite you in, but the rest of the mutton is all yours." She gave her 100 taels of silver after taking it out. "This is for the copper pot. The Empress Dowager said they would have to bother you if they wanted to eat it again in the future. Granny Lu, please help me thank the Empress Dowager." Zhou Ying added, "There's still some minced meat, so 111 make meatball soup. You can taste my cooking this way too." "Can't wait." Granny Lu immediately nodded and smiled. The taste of the spicy hot pot was too tempting. She had long wanted to try it, but was embarrassed to ask. "Please wait a moment." Zhou Ying smiled and nodded, then turned around and got busy. A pot of steaming mutton meatballs and radish soup was served in a short while. The fresh fragrance of the mutton and radish fused together into a tempting mix. Zhou Ying looked at Granny Liu's twitching nose and laughed secretly. She said, "Granny Liu, please enjoy. We'll go back now. You had a busy day, so let's share a meal. When we're done, they'll send you out together." Granny Liu spoke quickly. Shizu's stomach grumbled at this moment, and she could only nod in agreement. Naturally, Granny Lu still delivered the majority of the soup to the dining area. The remaining food was only then consumed by the four women with a sizable scallion pancake. After getting her fill, Zhouing used her spiritual sense to scan the place while leaving the palace. She found the Empress Dowager, the Emperor, the Empress, and the young princes and princesses all inside, including the 8th princess, who had been arranged to go to the hot spring manor. Because of the slow boiling of the hot pot, a few of them even started to fight over the readied meat. It was a lively scene. It was probably a rare occasion for the royal family. Chapter 544. Mrs. Sun. After leaving the palace, Zhouing reminded Granny Lu as they boarded the carriage, "Granny Lu, if someone has a weak stomach, they might get diarrhea after eating spicy hot pot. You must call the doctor in time if this happens. The Empress Dowager knows about this. There are imperial physicians specially prepared for this occasion." "Great. See you soon." "All right, let's talk again when there's a chance." Granny Lu waved her hand and asked the coachman to send them back. When they reached home, Zhouing gave the two women 2 taels of money and said, "Great performance today. Thank you for your reward, madam." After the two of them received the silver, they thanked her and left. Zhouing asked Kuehua to make a cup of tea for her, then leaned back on her chair and closed her eyes to rest. On the other hand, Yang Wanyu waited until the afternoon, when the officials returned to the palace. She brought young Chengxin, who had been whining about hunger, back home after realizing the first prince wouldn't be there. When she found out young Wanning and her brother weren't around, she thought they were also out looking for help, so she ignored them. After dinner, she simply went back to her courtyard to rest. As for young Chengxin, he had secretly gone to Prince Hu's residence. However, Prince Hui had gone out to avoid them after they left in the afternoon, so he had once again missed him. He wanted to rush in immediately because he was extremely furious about this, but the guards dragged him out like a chicken. In the evening, Zhouing was processing the mutton while Yang Wanning and her brother, whose eyes were swollen like peaches, walked in with a white-haired, skinny woman. She paused for a moment before standing up. She asked, "She is? Cousin sister-in-law, this is Mrs. Sun, one of my mother's dowry maids. We came here to discuss something with you," Yang Wanning said. As soon as she finished speaking, Mrs. Sun immediately bowed to Zhouing and said, "Greetings, third young mistress. Mrs. Sun, you're too polite. Please, get up." After Zhouing Su helped her up, she looked at the red and swollen eyes of the siblings and knew it was something major. She asked, "Have you two eaten yet?" "Yes, let's have dinner tonight also," Yang Wanning suggested. "All right, you guys go wash your faces with Shizhu. Have a cup of tea and rest while I get these mutton skewers ready." "Thank you. I'll come back to help you later." Yang Wanning then followed Shizhu back to the house. Meanwhile, Zhouing and Haitang continued to get those skewers ready. In the evening, Gu Chengrui rushed back with Zhou Huaiming. When he saw the skewers, Zhou Huaiming exclaimed in surprise, "What a surprise! It looks like I'm in luck today. Eat more later, then." Zhouing smiled. She turned to Gu Chengrui and said, "Oh right, Wanning and her brother are here. Go and greet them. We'll start grilling these skewers when the charcoal is lit." "Sure. I'll stay behind and help you roast these skewers. You know how good my skills are." "Ha ha ha, as long as you don't burn it, it's all good." Zhouing smiled. Gu Chengrui smiled and walked straight into the house. Seeing Gu Chengrui enter, Yang Wanning introduced Mrs. Sun to him. Mrs. Sun walked over and knelt. She choked, "Third young master, you have to stand up for madam. She died an unjust death. Please, get up. There are guests. If there's anything you need my help for, let's talk after dinner." Gu Chengrui helped her up. At the same time, he felt her pulse and was shocked. "Do you have stomach problems?" "Yes, I've been starving intermittently over the past few years, so my stomach has developed some problems. You have to take better care of yourself. They'll prescribe you a few prescriptions later." "Thank you, third young master." Chapter 656. Talking it out. Sit down and have a cup of tea first. 111. Go change my clothes. After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, He entered his room and placed a title deed under his pillow. He quickly changed into relatively thin clothes and washed up before walking back out. The charcoal was ready, and Yang Wanning was about to get up and help. Gu Chengrui stopped her. Chenglin and one will go over. You all wait in the house. Yang Chenglin immediately stood up and followed Gu Chengrui out. Seeing Zhou Ying and the others roasting skewers, Yang Chenglin asked in surprise, "Is this smoked meat edible? You'll know when you try it. It's very delicious." Gu Chengrui turned his head and asked, "One heard there would be an exam next spring. How are the preparations going?" "It's going well, but I don't know if one can still participate." Yang Chenglin replied with a smile. No matter what, Madame Chui was his grandmother, and Mrs. Chui was his stepmother. They had committed a major crime. He would have to miss his exams because of filial piety, even if the emperor did not punish them. Of course, there was one other possibility, and that was to get an opportunity to cut off relations with the Yang family. He just didn't know if they could succeed in doing so. Gu Chengrui paused momentarily, remembered their situation, and felt sorry for him. He patted his little shoulder and said, "Take your time. There's no need to rush. Gold will always shine, so you just have to be prepared. You just have to always be prepared for a chance to soar into the sky. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to shine even if the opportunity was given to you." "Yeah, I know." Yang Chenglin nodded in agreement, then looked at him with admiration. After all, Gu Chengrui was one of them. The Gu family's situation was much more severe than the Yang family's back then. Didn't Gu Chengrui not give up? Instead, he was ready for any opportunity, which led to his current status. Gu Chengrui felt a little guilty under Yang Chenglin's gaze of worship. He was where he was today not only because of those 3 years of study, but also because of his experiences in his previous life over the past 30 years. "What are you two brothers talking about? You're having a good time?" Zhou Huiming asked curiously as he clumsily flipped the skewers. "It's just a casual chat. Why is the guest cooking? Let me do it." Gu Chengrui stepped forward and said to him, Wait. With you guiding me by my side, this is a perfect learning opportunity. That way, I can make it for myself next time." "All right, then I'll pass you the sauces." Gu Chengrui found a spoon and started making a bowl of noodles for Mrs. Sunday. He then took 2 steamed buns and roasted them on a skewer. Of course, he only sprinkled some pepper and salt on them. Yang Chenglin looked at Zhou Ying skillfully roasting the skewers and went forward to ask, "Can one give it a try?" "Of course, but everyone is waiting to eat. You should wait until everyone is almost done eating before giving it a try." Zhou Ying replied as she sprinkled some seasoning on the mutton skewers and placed them on a plate. "Bring this into the house for your sister and Mrs. Sunday." "All right." Yang Chenglin nodded repeatedly. At the same time, he was enamored by the fragrance of the mutton skewers. Just as he was about to leave, Gu Chengrui called out to him. He placed the charred bun slices on the plate and said, "Mrs. Sun has stomach problems, so tell her to eat fewer mutton skewers, okay?" "I understand." Yang Chenglin nodded, then carried the plate into the house. Gu Chengrui returned to his room and brought out an additional small table. He also brought out a jar of wine as he taught Zhou Huiming to roast the skewers. The two of them sat at the small table and ate while roasting. Chapter 546, Cause of Death. All right, let's keep our mouths focused on eating it while it's hot, Zhou Luaming said as he bit into a freshly roasted lamb skewer. Of course, everything is delicious when it's just out of the pot, Gu Chengrui replied with a smile. He raised his glass and added, "Don't just eat meat. It's more delicious when combined with a mouthful of wine." True, eating too much mutton will make you sick of it. One need to drink some wine to wash it down. Joel Luaming raised his small wine cup and drank it in one gulp. He then raised his head and asked, "By the way, when will you be able to sell your greenhouse vegetables? You must leave some for me." Vegetables grown in greenhouses have a similar growth period as those grown on land. Other than cabbage and bakoi, I'm afraid you won't be able to enjoy the rest before the new year. That's good enough. At least one can see greens in my meal in the middle of winter. You have to leave some for me when the time comes. Of course, no problem. If you're not busy, you can help me sell it to the others too. Easy. It's just a matter of getting the word out. I'm afraid there won't be enough for it to go around. The rarer an item is, the more valuable it is. That's true. Zhouing waited for them to stop and asked, Brother Zhou, how are the roses selling? Can they be sold at a high price? Wild roses were the primary source of income for Sinan village. Their lives would be difficult if they could not sell for a high price. Why don't you take a guess? Zhou Luihing turned his head and asked. One heard from Mingyu that I couldn't buy it even if one wanted to. I think it shouldn't be bad. That's right. It was initially sold for nearly half a tael of silver per pound. Later, many women and young ladies realized its effectiveness and gradually raised the price. By the time you returned to the capital, 1 tael of rose tea was selling for 1 tael of silver. Even this was barely enough. The tea house bought the last 10 pounds at a high price the day before yesterday. Looks like Sinan village is saved. Yeah, let them take good care of those wild roses. That's their treasure. They'll write a letter to Hu Chun later. Gu Chengrui nodded in agreement. Soon, Yang Chenglin ran out and tried roasting the meat. Once Zhouing estimated that everyone had eaten enough, she baked steamed buns and sweet potato slices and brought them into the house. After dinner, they sent Zhou Lu aiming off, and the couple handed the stall over to Haiteng and her husband before returning home. Seeing Yang Chenglin, who was so sleepy that he could not open his eyes, Gu Chengrui said, Chenglin, go inside to sleep. Cousin, there's no need. After we're done, we still have to rush back home. Yang Wanning said. When Yang Chenglin heard that, he immediately stood up, despite being extremely sleepy. Tell me, what exactly happened? Gu Chengrui sat down with Zhou Ying and asked. Madam was killed. When Mrs. Sun said this, she started crying. When Yang Wanning and her brother heard this, they started tearing up. Zhouing had no choice but to hand each of them a handkerchief. After they recovered, Mrs. Sun continued, ever since the incident in the Gu family, Master gradually began alienating Madam, which put her on guard. But although Master alienated her and Mrs. and Madam Chui made things difficult for her, Madam gradually relaxed her vigilance after realizing there was no bodily harm. It was not until last winter that Madam felt her condition worsening, so she found a doctor. The doctor claimed Madam had overeaten cold or chilly food, which caused her body to get chilly and her blood vessels blocked. That was why her health was deteriorating. Later, he prescribed some medicine for Madam to drink. Her health improved slightly at first, but the medicine stopped when the snowstorm arrived. The charcoal supply stopped, so her health took a sharp turn. One night, she passed away from the chill when the fireplace ran out of charcoal. Chapter 547 Analysis. I heard from Yang Wanyu, who let it slip accidentally, that Mrs. Chui cut off my mother's charcoal. There was also the chili food that Mrs. Sun mentioned. If incorrect, it should be the hardy ice plant. Yang Wanning said angrily. Gu Chengrui looked at Mrs. Sun and asked, Did you find out what the chili food the doctor was referring to was? No, we didn't find anything after 3 days of investigation. Of course, it's also possible that someone found out and replaced them. Mrs. Sun looked at Yang Wanning and continued. As for the hardy ice plant you mentioned, I have never seen it before, so I don't know if it's true. Gu Chengrui nodded and looked at Yang Wanning. Wanning, what do you plan to do next? Chenglin, you too. Tell me what you think. I want to sever all ties with the Yang family. Cousin, please help me bring that scholar over tomorrow. Oh, where do you plan to expose Mrs. Chui? My father will definitely be there to collect their corpses, so one want to cut off all ties with him before that. We don't want to be in mourning for those two, and we don't want to get dragged down by them. Yeah, otherwise, we'll be acknowledging the thief as our mother. Zhouing agreed with them wholeheartedly. After all, the emperor had already begun investigating Yang Shiqing's corruption. Once he was found guilty, they were likely to face beheading or exile, which was worse than the Gu family. She reminded the siblings, with only this evidence, I'm afraid you won't be able to leave the Yang family. At most, you can deny having Mrs. Chui as your mother. You won't even be able to get rid of your grandmother. Yes, with the current evidence, I'm afraid it's not enough for you to leave the Yang family. Gu Chengrui nodded in agreement. Even when Gu Chengrui and Zhouing were kicked out of the family with nothing after almost getting killed, the patriarch tried to persuade them to make peace, not to mention that the Yang siblings had no evidence that Yang Shirqing had harmed or even abused them. Yang Wanning was stunned after hearing that and a little discouraged. How can we sever our relationship? First, the elder must take the initiative to abandon you, but your reputation will be damaged. Second, you can point out that Yang Shirqing is a fatal danger to you, and that you have no choice but to do so in order to survive. Although this would affect your reputation, a reasonable person would see your hardship, Gu Chengrui explained seriously. Of course, if you can be on the side of justice and create a scene, then being abandoned by your father will attract sympathy from the people instead. It'll depend on how you play this out. Zhouing echoed. I understand. Thank you. We'll go back and think about it seriously. Yang Wanning nodded thoughtfully. She got up after that. Cousin-in-law, you've been busy the whole day. Rest early. Well, head home now. We'll send you guys home. It's on the way to King Rui's place, and one can ask for that scholar. Gu Chengrui stood up and offered. Thank you for helping out. Yang Wanning thanked Gu Chengrui and left with Yang Qinglin and Mrs. Sunday. After they left, Zhouing sat down on a chair and drank her tea. After that, she called for the bath to be ready and happily took a flower bomb bath. Gu Chengrui returned home just as she was done. Zhouing went forward to take his cloak and hang it at the side before asking, Is it done? Yes, King Rui has sent someone to the manor to pick up the scholar. He will be entering the capital at around 7 tomorrow morning. Do you want to take a bath? It's lovely. Gu Chengrui hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Sure. We'll go prepare some wormwood leaves. Chapter 548 Great Evil. After Gu Chengrui finished his bath, he entered his bedroom and saw Zhouing leaning against the headboard and reading a book. Under the light, she looked like a pixie, smiling seductively. She stretched out her claws and pounced on him with a laugh. After a hearty exercise, Gu Chengrui took the title deed under his pillow and said, This is the title deed for the land I went to see today. It's a total of 2,200 acres. Oh, it's finally transferred? Where did you get the silver? Zhouing looked at her name and asked, surprised. Brother Zhou gave me the money from the wild rose sale. One didn't take the rest and gave it to him as his commission. How much did it sell in total? 4,300 taels. The manor was sold as barren land, so it cost 2,200 taels. Not bad. Well, split it equally. After Zhouing finished speaking, she put the title deed into her interspace. After that, she used her divine sense to look outside. After confirming that Shizhu had left, the two entered her interspace. After finishing her work, Zhouing took a glance at the Yang residence. The Yang siblings and Yang Chengsen were already asleep. Only Yang Wanyu was still rummaging through the old madam's room. After ensuring the siblings were safe, Zhouing left and collected another batch of vegetables. She washed a tomato and ate it after that. The interspace's tomato was delicious, sweet, and sour. The texture was not inferior to eating a watermelon. She washed a few more, cut them into slices, and mixed them with white sugar. When Gu Chengrui returned, she served them for supper. The next morning, Gu Chengrui had returned from morning court when Zhouing woke up. After they finished breakfast, Zhouing asked, Rui, has that scholar arrived in the capital? He's here. We can go pick him up anytime. Gu Chengrui added with a complicated expression, The first prince has pleaded for mercy on behalf of Mrs. and Madame Chui today. He hoped that their punishment could be changed to exile instead. That's strange. Yang Wanyu looked for him for half a day yesterday, but he didn't show up. Maybe he didn't think of a perfect solution. So what did the emperor say? Of course he rejected it, and he publicly announced the evil deeds of the Chui family. Just the number of girls that were forcefully sold by them surpassed more than 1,000. What about the third prince? Did he help? Kinda. He said that after such a disastrous year, It's not suitable for blood to spill again. Beheading might not be too suitable. In the end, after the discussion amongst the ministers, their sentence was changed to hanging. Hanging, isn't that even worse than beheading? They'll have to suffer for quite a while. Who asked them to commit such a heinous crime? True. Chapter 549 Relationships. Come in then. Young Wanyu invited them into her room. After everyone sat down, Young Wanyu looked at Young Wanning and said, "You're the eldest. Tell us what we should do. Since you've gathered everyone together, you must have an idea. I want to hear what you think." Young Wanning immediately kicked the ball back to her. She did not even want to acknowledge Mrs. and Madame Cui as her family, so she would not interfere in their matters. Young Wanyu had no choice, so she stood up and said, "One think we should go to the emperor together. Grandmother and mother must have been dragged down by the Cui family." After she finished speaking, no one agreed with her. Young Wanyu looked at Young Wanning and asked, "What do you think, big sister? Do you think it will work?" Instead of asking the emperor to change his sentence, one think it would be better to ask King In to release father first. Father knows more and has more connections. Yes, one think what she said makes sense. We have no position to speak of and no one to lead us. We can't even enter the palace. Mrs. Ning echoed. The elderly Mrs. Zhang, sitting at the side, had a blank expression on her face. She had no intention of participating at all. The younger Mrs. Zhao gloated and said, "One also agree with her." She looked at young Wanyu and added, "One heard that you and your brother not only went to look for Prince Hui yesterday, but also went to the palace gate to look for the 8th princess and empress. I heard you didn't even meet a single person after all that. This should tell you that this matter is very troublesome. If even the empress and the first prince can't change their fates, we probably won't be able to achieve anything, even if we kneel to our deaths at the palace gates." "You," young Wanyu glared at Mrs. Zhao. Mrs. Zhao smiled. "I'm telling the truth. From the looks of it, it's useless to do anything now. It's better to think of a way to gather some silver to buy 2 coffins. If you're not willing to help, then get out. You're not the only one here to help." Yang Chengsen stood up and chastised her. "I wish you good luck." Mrs. Zhao turned around and walked out. Mrs. Zhang immediately followed her. As for Mrs. Ning, she hesitated momentarily before sitting back down. She looked at the siblings and said, "Mirrors, Zhao's words may sound unpleasant, but we've already begged everyone we can. Since there's no change, we must prepare for the worst." You guys." Young Wanyu saw no one supporting saving her mother and immediately ran out angrily. Yang Chengsen huffed and followed. Mrs. Ning stood up and said, "Sorry for disturbing you. You're too polite." Young Wanning stood up and sent her out. She went inside to find Mrs. Sun and asked, "Mrs. Sun, do you know them?" Does Mrs. Zhao have a grudge with Mrs. Cui? When the Gu family was in trouble, Mrs. Zhao had a miscarriage. The rumors were that cats raised by Mrs. Cui caused it. As for whether it was on purpose, it was not confirmed. But from then on, Mrs. Zhao hated her. Mrs. Zhao is also a strong person. She relied on your father's favor to resist the suppression of Mrs. and Madame Cui. As for Mrs. Zhang, she's also a poor person. She was another woman the old madam arranged for master after your mother got pregnant. However, after so many years, she had never borne a child. Madam could not bear it anymore and finally promoted her to a concubine. As for Mrs. Ning, she moved into the residence 8 years ago. It was said she had connections with the Empress family, so she held some status here. All these years, she stayed out of the fight to protect herself. However, judging from what she said just now, she was probably trying to take advantage of the situation to be the main wife. Chapter 550 Disappointed, Main Wife? What else does the young residents even have left? Even my father's official position might be gone. Young Wanning sneered. No matter what, before you leave the Yang family, Try not to get into conflict with her. I understand. You should take a rest. Other than Chuanxi and me, don't believe anyone else's words in this courtyard. Yang Wanning then turned and walked away. She saw young Chenglin sitting in the room. Chenglin, go change into dark clothes and gather at the stable. We'll go to the Ministry of Justice soon. Got it, sister. Young Chenglin went to get ready after that. Yang Wanning changed into a set of blue clothes and went to the stable. When young Chenglin arrived, the siblings entered the carriage and headed straight for the Ministry of Justice. They went straight to King, and after arriving at the Ministry of Justice, but he wasn't there. Just as the two were about to leave, King walked in. When he saw the siblings, he paused and asked, "Why are you two little fellows here? What's the matter?" "Greetings, King." The two of them hurriedly bowed. "Please, get up. If you have something to say, just say it," King said. "Later in the afternoon, our grandmother and mother will be beheaded. We came here to ask if you can release our father so he can send them on their last journey." Yang Wanning requested, "Come with me." King walked out and added, "I've just asked the emperor about this." The emperor allowed him out, but he cannot leave the capital. "I'm afraid your grandmother and mother can't be sent back to their hometown for their burial." "Thank you." Yang Wanning thanked King, and King only smiled when he heard that. He then brought the siblings to the prison cell. Seeing young Shicheng sitting cross-legged facing the wall, King paused momentarily and said, "Young Shicheng, you're out of here." The warden immediately opened the cell door. Young Shicheng was shocked for a moment. He then stood up and walked over to greet King and "Thank you, King." "All right, enough with the pleasantries. Today, your mother, wife, and the Chui family will be beheaded. Go send them on their journey." After King finished speaking, he walked out.
Yes.
Yang Shicheng responded and immediately followed. When he passed Yang Wanning and Yang Chenglin, he glanced at them but ignored them and walked out. Yang Chenglin, who had been looking forward to meeting his father, suddenly felt disappointed when he saw young Shicheng's attitude. No matter what, they had to come to pick him up, but he didn't even respond to their arrival. Yang Wanning saw his aggrieved face and rubbed his hair. She pulled on his sleeve and followed the men. When they arrived outside, they saw that young Shicheng was nowhere to be seen, so they entered their carriage. When they saw young Shicheng sitting inside expressionlessly, the two of them came up and called out to him before asking the coachman to hurry back. After leaving the Ministry of Justice, Yang Wanning turned her head and asked, "Father, are we going back home directly?"
Yes.
Young Shicheng replied as he lifted the curtain and looked outside. After finding that the streets had been cleared, he knew that the people of the Chui family would be escorted to the execution grounds soon. "Where are Wan Yu and Chengxin?" "I don't know. Previously, Wan Yu wanted to unite everyone at home to kneel before the imperial palace and beg the emperor for mercy. However, one and the other concubines agreed to ask for your opinion before deciding, so they ran away." "Nonsense." Young Shicheng immediately said this with a gloomy face. The emperor had even arrested him when he had no evidence of his crimes. The emperor was obviously using them as a warning to the others. How could he let go of the two main culprits, Mrs. and Madame Chui? Pleading for mercy would only ruin the young residents further. Chapter 551. It's useless to beg anyone. Yang Wanning didn't say anything to that. Seeing this, young Shicheng had no intention of asking any more questions. Instead, he asked the coachman to speed up. After returning to the residence, young Shicheng washed up and ate. He changed into black clothes and gathered everyone in the manor. Yang Wanning looked at his outfit and understood what he meant. However, young Wan Yu was still blind to it. Or rather, she didn't want to understand it. She only wanted to save her grandmother and mother so that she could maintain her good life. Therefore, when she saw young Shicheng, it was as if she had seen a savior. She immediately pounced over. "Father, quickly think of a way to save grandmother and mother." "That's right, father. Otherwise, it will be too late." Yang Chengxin echoed. "Shut up, all of you. The announcement has been issued. You think it's a joke? It's useless to beg anyone now." Young Shurching replied with a dark face. When young Wanyu heard his words, the last straw broke the camel's back. She sat on the ground and cried like a wronged child. She cried without caring about her image. Zhouing felt a little sad, but she also knew that her feelings for them were mixed, so she did not have the slightest sympathy. Although young Chengsan didn't cry, he silently wiped away his tears. The more he wiped away his tears, the more his dams were about to burst. "Shut up," young Shurching shouted with a headache. He called his butler over and gave him 500 taels of silver. "Buy 2 blackwood coffins, then buy 16 cedar wood coffins. If you don't have enough silver, ask them to put it on the tab." "I understand," the butler replied, then took the silver notes and rushed out. When young Wanyu saw the banknotes in young Shiching's hands, her crying became softer until it was completely silent. Young Shurching didn't think much about it and thought she was tired from crying. He turned around and said, "All right, follow me to the execution ground and send off my mother and madam." Young Chengsan wanted to refuse but was stopped by young Wanning. Young Shurching did not cause trouble for them after he came out, so they shouldn't take the initiative to cause trouble. Otherwise, this would leave a mark on their reputation, affecting their future. She had to find another suitable opportunity. Moreover, she could help her mother see the outcome of Mrs. and Madame Cui. Instead, Mrs. Ning opened her mouth and said, "Master, Wanru is only 6 years old. She shouldn't go. It would be bad if she got traumatized." After hearing this, young Shurching was originally unhappy, but he turned his head and met young Wanru's innocent eyes. He simply nodded and replied, "She stays." The group of people walked out solemnly after that. At the same time, the streets from the Ministry of Justice to the execution ground were already filled with people. Some even prepared a lot of small stones and stood at the side, waiting excitedly. Many were cursing the Cui family members while waiting for their appearance. Soon, 18 prison carriages slowly drove out of prison. The youngest prisoner at the back was only 3 years old. He was imprisoned in the prison cart and held the guardrail at the side as he looked at the crowd curiously. The people on both sides immediately got into a frenzy as soon as the prison carriages came out. The sounds of shouting and yelling got chaotic as stones and horse manure continuously smashed into the prison carriages. Mrs. and Madame Cui were hit in the head and screamed in pain, but it was useless no matter how they shouted or dodged. Not only did the number of things thrown at them not decrease, but it also increased more than before. Some even wanted to rush over and beat them up, but fortunately, the soldiers stopped them in time. Chapter 552 Public Anger. The public threw the stuff in their hands harder and harder at them. The 3-year-old kid at the back was originally watching the show. Soon, he was hit on the head, and a red bump immediately appeared. He grimaced in pain. He started cursing. "Who hit me? Stand out. They'll break your legs." Beast, such a beast. Even a child can say such words. No wonder he's also sentenced to death. Indeed, look at his fierce appearance. One look, and you can tell that he's not a good person. Like father, like son, it's fortunate that he's going to be executed. Otherwise, he'll be another criminal in the future. The child's mother listened to the people's discussions, but was too lazy to argue or turn around to comfort her child. Instead, she silently and numbly shed tears. The members of the Cui family were cursed and smashed with stones all the way. Finally, they arrived at the execution ground in half an hour. Soon, young Shurching and the others also rushed over. "Master! Master! Save me! Save me!" Mrs. Cui shouted when she saw him. Young Shurching shook his head and pulled young Chengsan to stand under the execution platform. Seeing this, Mrs. Cui burst into tears. Previously, she had heard that many other families also offered loans. Why was it that when others were fine, they had to die here? She couldn't understand why they ended up this way. Her husband was clearly fine. Why couldn't he think of a way to save them? Young Wanyu wanted to go forward, but she didn't dare take another step forward when she saw the soldiers guarding the side. She just stared at them silently. At this moment, the members of the Chui family started to curse Mrs. and Madame Chui. They wouldn't have ended up here if they hadn't asked them to get involved in the loan shark business. When it was close to noon, the supervisor of the execution, King An, and two officials from the Ministry of Justice walked over. One of the officials first emphasized the rules to maintain order. Then, another person announced their crimes. Some onlookers who had pitted them were enraged when they heard about their crimes, especially when they realized they had trafficked many women. All of them wanted to go up and beat them up. This was especially true for Mrs. and Madame Chui. Some even threw large rocks at them. King An turned to look at the hourglass and asked, "Are there any objections? If there are no objections, prepare the execution." In addition, someone suggested that the country had just stabilized and wasn't ready for bloodshed, so their execution by beheading was changed to hanging. As soon as he finished speaking, four gallows were carried up by the bailiffs. The people below immediately started discussing animatedly. Some people felt they were let off too easily, as their corpses would be left intact. However, there were also others who gloated at their misfortune. Decapitation only hurts for a moment. After that, you wouldn't feel a thing. However, hanging was different. Not to mention the more pain they would suffer, it was more humiliating too. Thinking of this, Mrs. and Madame Chui couldn't stay silent. "Master! Master! Help! Please let them kill us in one fell swoop." Mrs. Chui shouted again. Yang Shiqing was so angry that his teeth itched. So many people were watching from the side. What could he do? Once he opened his mouth, he would definitely be pushed to the forefront. Yang Chengsen raised his head and looked at Yang Shiqing, but Yang Shiqing just rubbed his head and didn't say a thing. Yang Chengsen didn't dare to speak. After all, he had seen the people's reactions and the Chui family's miserable state. He didn't want stones and feces to hit him too. Chapter 553 Execution. Shut up. One of the soldiers saw Mrs. Chui shouting non-stop, so he stepped forward and kicked her down. Mrs. Chui simply crawled on the ground and wailed louder. At the same time, she was filled with regret. She regretted helping Yang Shiqing do so much dirty work, but was abandoned at her final moment. In fact, she ended up worse than Mrs. Gu. At least Mrs. Gu died in their residence and had a grand funeral. As for her, it would be good if Yang Shiqing could even bury her in a decent coffin. She even left her son with the crime of being the descendant of a sinner. If there weren't any major turns of events, it would be difficult for him to pursue an official career. Seeing this, the members of the Chui family also realized that they were out of hope this time. All of them started crying. As they cried, the murmuring below the execution platform gradually stopped. As for Yang Wanyu, she looked at Mrs. Siu's despairing wails and silently shed tears. Madame Chui stared at the crowd below numbly. Her mind was replaying her life. When she was young, her family valued boys over girls. At a young age, she was already a good helper at home and outside. When she married a scholar from a good family, she thought she could finally live a good life. Who knew her husband would die of illness when Yang Shiqing was just 1 month old? Later on, she did the best she could. She finally raised Yang Shiqing to be a man and got him to marry a golden goose like Mrs. Gu. Her days soared into the sky. She never expected that she would end up like this. What happened? Now that she thought about it, it was all because of dissatisfaction, resentment, and greed. They wouldn't have come to this if they hadn't dabbled in the loan shark business. Listening to all kinds of complaints and curses from her family members, she ignored them. Yes, she didn't want to bother with anyone anymore. If they didn't exist, if they didn't keep asking for money, if they didn't betray her, she wouldn't have been pushed to the execution ground today. In this life, she never owed any of her family members. The only one to whom she was genuinely indebted was Mrs. Gu. Although she had snatched her imperial mandate, she had helped pave the way for her son's official career, given them a stable and wealthy life, and even left a son and a daughter for the Yang family. She had done everything she could for the Yang family. But they? At the thought of this, Madame Chui finally shed tears of regret. King In threw down a warrant and announced, "Begin the execution." As soon as the warrant landed, 8 soldiers stepped forward and grabbed the 4 youngest members of the Chui family, placing them on the gallows. Perhaps it was because they were young that their execution process was exceptionally quick. However, the agonizing struggle before death caused deep despair in everyone who was waiting for their turn. The timid ones were so terrified that they peed their pants. However, no matter their thoughts or reactions, they were still hung on the gallows. In the end, there were only 2 left, Mrs. and Madame Chui. Madame Chui was already numb to the outside world, and Mrs. Chui was on the verge of insanity. When they were placed on the gallows, Mrs. Chui saw her tearful children and the expressionless Yang Shicheng. She also saw Yang Wanning and her brother, who showed no expressions. Thinking about her children's future, she couldn't leave like this. Otherwise, Yang Shicheng would give up on them very soon. Therefore, she immediately shouted, "Master, master!" It's Mrs. Gu. This is all her revenge. The surrounding onlookers were stunned by her words, not knowing what she meant. This pissed off Yang Wanning, but simultaneously, she realized this was a golden opportunity. Just as King In was about to declare her execution, Yang Wanning rushed forward and said, "Wait a minute. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.